Tonight's meeting is in two parts. We have a regular council meeting, and rather than have a committee of the whole, which we often do on Monday nights at the end of the meeting, we're actually going to end the council meeting and then open up with our once a month town hall format, where anyone can come speak up the microphone on any topic they wish, and I'll provide some instructions for those. So getting to tonight's agenda, we have two delegations tonight, and then we're going to adopt minutes. Then I will open up the floor to public input on the resolutions for adoption, and then finally we'll hear from the councillors who sit as CRD directors, and they will report on happenings at the CRD. So with that, I'd like to call up our first delegation, Gillian McHugh. Please come to the microphone. Welcome, Gillian.
My name is Julie McHugh, and I'm going to talk about why council should allow miniature goats in Saanich backyards. Doing this will help us become a more sustainable community. 2 years ago, I canvassed my neighborhood in Gordon Head, and 132 of my neighbors, including Andrew Weaver, the Green Party provincial leader, signed my petition. They agreed with me that we should change our bylaws and allow miniature goats in our backyards. First, let's talk about why miniature goats are good for the environment. They can not only mow your lawn for you, but they can also eat invasive plant species like blackberry bushes and ivy. A recent example from the Times Colonist is a couple of goats that were hired to clear some land in Esquimalt by eating ivy and blackberry bushes. Goats happily mow lawns and eat blackberry bushes without polluting our air and sound. At the other end, their non-smelly manure can help fertilize our gardens without using a fossil fuel-based fertilizer. Goats can provide hormone-free and antibiotic-free milk. Now let's talk about some of the common misconceptions about miniature goats. Goat poo is not nearly as smelly as dog poo, as my research study at the Beacon Hill Petting Zoo showed. Here is my cousin and myself conducting our study. We surveyed 32 people and found that dog poo is 2 times more smelly than goat poo. Miniature goats aren't typically noisy if they're cared for like a pet. They typically behave better if you have more than one goat because they like companionship. Male goats can be aggressive unless they're neutered. For example, Seattle's bylaw that regulates goats in their backyards allows for female goats and neutered male goats. All goats must be dehorned. Goats are similar to dogs, which means that they're quiet if they're cared for like a pet, and they're given love and attention. Miniature goats can be very cuddly and could make great therapy pets. Goats like to eat anything that they can get their hoofs on, but if properly fenced in, they aren't a problem. Deer are a much bigger problem for Saanich gardeners than goats will ever be, as we learned from Seattle. Don Jordan, the executive director of the Seattle Pound, says he's not aware of a single complaint that's been lodged in the city relating to smelly or noisy goats. Seattle's backyard goat bylaw passed in 2007 and allows for pygmy, dwarf, and miniature goats. Saanich should follow in the lead of Seattle and allow miniature goats in our backyards because they're good for the environment, as well as it will help us fulfill part of the Saanich Community Plan, which states that we're striving to become a model sustainable community and a steward of the environment. I personally want Saanich to allow miniature goats in our backyards because they're good for the environment as well as they're cute and cuddly pets. Are there any questions?
Great. Thank you for your presentation, Jillian. It was wonderful. Are there any questions from councillors? I saw Councillor Plant's hands up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much, Jillian. My question first is to staff. If I could ask perhaps our planning director who's here this evening, rather, if you could comment on any work that's been done thus far to perhaps enable something such as this initiative to go forward, and then I'll make a motion after.
Thank you. Through Mr. Mayor, up to Councillor Plant. Saanich Council recently initiated the terms of reference for the Agriculture and Food Security Task Force, and that study will be commencing in the next few months. It will be a 2015-2016 initiative. A request for proposal is shortly to go out to hire a consultant to assist with that work, and urban agriculture, including goats, could certainly form part of that study.
Councillor Plant?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm wondering if a question through you to staff, if it might be more helpful to have an explicit report coming on miniature goats separately that might happen quicker than this greater task force.
Certainly through Mr. Mayor. If council so directs staff to do that, absolutely, that could be brought forward by staff.
Thank you again. So I would like to move at this point that a report be created with input from the appropriate advisory committees in Saanich to look at the feasibility of miniature goats, pygmy goats, and dwarf goats in Saanich backyards.
Second.
Okay. For discussion, Councillor Murdoch.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was pleased to hear Councillor Plant's recommendation that it be referred to an advisory committee. I think that's probably a good way to go. I know there was a considerable amount of discussion about chickens at Healthy Saanich when that initiative came forward, and that was certainly helpful in at least reflecting on the circumstances within Saanich and our neighboring jurisdictions that eventually form part of the amendment to the bylaw. So I would think that it's a discussion that needs to happen at the advisory committee level prior to a report coming to council. I think that there should be some discussion. I also think, just based on the correspondence we've received on the issue, there's quite a few folks who'd be interested in having some input into it. So I'm delighted. I'm grateful that you brought this forward for us to consider this evening, and I think it's certainly worthwhile having a look at goats in particular and having a discussion about really an opportunity to have small livestock in the community.
Thank you, Councillor Murdoch. Councillor German.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much for the presentation. I'm going to be supportive of the motion. I think it's something that has been tried elsewhere, as you pointed out, and there may well be a rationale for it. I agree with Councillor Murdoch that it should go to his committee in particular, and perhaps others, for discussion prior to a report coming to council, because otherwise what council would probably do is refer the report to committees, which would just simply lengthen the process in that respect. And council, I think this is reasonable as a one-off, given the track record, given the rather excellent presentation we had. Council has to be a little careful, because we are going to be looking at the subject of urban agriculture, and we don't want to suggest to people that we're wide open for all sorts of one-off decisions prior to that study being undertaken. That could throw a bit of a wrench in things, unfortunately. But in this case, I think this is one that is supportable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor German. Councillor Haynes, please.
Thank you, through the Mayor. Gillian, very nice presentation. I have a couple of questions for you. When did you start this program to work to introduce miniature goats?
I started it 2 years ago.
So 2 years is a long time, isn't it?
Yeah.
So one of the committees that we would like you to come to is called the Planning, Transportation and Economic Development, and I'm concerned that you've been a long time at this already, and our next meeting is in June, so I'd like to invite you to come to our June 11th meeting and make a little presentation for us and pick up some more information. Would you be able to do that?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Next, I'm a bit concerned, Julian. We do have a bylaw about dog noises, and if dogs bark for 10 minutes, you can get complaints. I did read some of your information there, and you have some comments about the noise that comes from miniature goats and how that might be controlled. Do you have anything you can share with us?
Yeah, well, actually, miniature goats, they aren't actually noisy. If you've actually been to the Beacon Hill Petting Zoo, you can tell that it's not really loud there, and that actually the peacocks are more loud than the goats. And as when you care for them like a pet and you give them love and attention, they aren't actually very noisy.
I have one more question here, if I may. How many people do you think in Saanich would be interested in having miniature goats? Will we have to worry about a mass number of goats all over Saanich, maybe escaping, maybe breeding with the deer and then eating the calves?
Well, I know that a couple of people that would want to goat, but it definitely wouldn't be as big of a problem as deer, as Seattle has kind of shown, because it's not going to be a big population. It's still going to...
Very good. So I'm glad you mentioned Seattle. I wonder if we could contact Seattle and just see how many people took up on having miniature goats. That might give us an idea in Saanich of the impact that this would have.
Yeah, actually also in Denver and San Francisco and
Some other place, yeah.
and Portland has also
Very good.
allowed it.
Very good. So maybe that would be a little bit of research you could do to bring back to the committee. Julian, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up is Councillor Brownell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Gillian, thank you very much. We've had a few young people speak to us of late, and it's great and encouraging to see you take an interest in something. I know that these goats came up when we were doing the chickens in urban agriculture.